Good evening, everybody. It is July 22nd. Welcome to a new episode of System Update, our live nightly show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively here on Rumble, the free speech alternative to YouTube. Tonight, we have a very special guest on System Update, and I'm excited to announce who it is. That special guest is myself. As I think many of you know, I announced it on Friday. I'm actually on vacation. I was taking a vacation starting on Saturday for the next 10 days or so. And I announced that we would have at least one, maybe a series of guest hosts to cover the show. We were going to be on there every night while I'm traveling. But obviously, there was no way for me to simply disappear and not comment on an event as momentous, as historic, as bizarre, and as meaningful as Joe Biden's so-called decision to no longer seek the Democratic nomination for president, despite the fact that as recently as 24 hours before his announcement on Sunday, he and everybody close to him were continuing to insist that there was no chance at all that he was going to withdraw from the race. He continued to vow that he was staying in the race until the end, no matter what. He even said that he had campaign events scheduled for this upcoming week, that he didn't care how many Democratic elites or office holders or donors continued to try and pressure him out of the race. He believed, I think somewhat validly, that he was the voters' choice to be the Democratic nominee for 2024. As weird and bizarre and manipulated that 2024 vote was, that was still the Democratic Party's process for choosing their nominee, quote unquote, democratically. He was its choice, and he said he's never leaving. And yet, out of the blue, in a huge surprise to pretty much everybody, other than about three people, in his home in Delaware, where he is self-isolating due to COVID, he announced on Saturday night, or at least under his name was announced, under his Twitter name was announced, a decision in a letter written on his personal stationery and purportedly signed by him, that he had decided that he was going to leave the race after all. And then very shortly thereafter, there was an actual tweet, not a signed letter, but just a tweet under the Joe Biden account announcing that not only was he leaving, but that he was endorsing his vice president, Kamala Harris, to become the nominee in his place for the president, as the presidential nominee for the Democratic Party. Now, there's a lot to say about this, and because I'm on vacation, I'm going to limit some of what I say. I'll probably have a lot more to say when I get back. If there's other major news events while I'm traveling, I will certainly do my best to weigh in, but only in that case. My kids will kill me if I do it too often. But I did want to share a few thoughts about what happened here, because, as I said, it is a event of massive proportion, of historic proportion. And there's a lot of things that I think it provokes a lot of questions that really still haven't been answered. So, first of all, let us just note that for 8 years now, we have heard from the Democratic Party, its defenders, its media allies, pretty much everyone who admits they support the Democratic Party or hides the fact that they support the Democratic Party, the same message repetitively offered over and over, which is that democracy, American democracy, is in peril. The survival of American democracy is in danger, and the only way it can be saved is if you vote for the Democratic Party. That was their message in 2016. That was their message in 2020. It's their message again this year. And if you look at their behavior as a party, I would say they are the strangest guardians of democracy you could ever possibly find. Just look at how they've conducted themselves in their last three so-called primaries. In 2016, when Bernie Sanders ran against Hillary Clinton, did far, far better than anyone expected. She was supposed to have a cakewalk to a coronation. The DNC intervened and cheated. And in the words not of me, but of Elizabeth Warren and Donna Brazile, the former chairwoman of the Democratic National Committee, the Democratic Party, quote, rigged the vote to ensure that Hillary Clinton would win and that Bernie would lose. And as you probably recall, WikiLeaks leaked a large amount of documents that revealed specifically how the DNC was cheating. And as a result, right before the Democratic convention, top officials of the Democratic National Committee, including Debbie Wasserman Schultz and all of her minions, were forced to resign because of the embarrassment of how anti-democratic that race was, how manipulated it was, how rigged it was, how much cheating the DNC did to deny the voters of the Democratic Party the right to democratically choose the nominee because they were scared that the voter would choose wrong, that they would choose Bernie Sanders, and they cheated to make sure Hillary Clinton got the nomination. In 2020, after Bernie won the first three primaries in Iowa, New Hampshire, and especially in Nevada, where he crushed the field, Barack Obama, by all news accounts, in one day, making secret phone calls, forced three other establishment candidates out of the race, including Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar, who up until that point were getting a significant vote total from people who liked the Democratic establishment, knowing that Barack Obama did that. They were taking away the votes from Joe Biden. The only two candidates left were, besides Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, who they allowed to stay in the race past Super Tuesday, even though her candidacy was a complete debacle. She was beloved by a lot of Democratic elites, was funded by dark money, a dark money PAC by a Silicon Valley fan of hers. But other than that, I mean, she even came to third place in her own state. She had no chance. And the only reason Obama wanted her and let her stay in the race was because she was at least going to take away votes from Bernie Sanders. And that is how Joe Biden became the nominee. In fact, when Joe Biden, over the course of the last month since the debate, began ranting and raving about the quote-unquote Democratic elites who were trying to force him from the race, a lot of those Democratic elites went on television quite angry to say, I think Joe Biden is the last person who ought to be ranting and raving about Democratic elites, given that it was we, the Democratic elites, who in 2020 ensured that he would win by doing exactly what I explained. And then in 2024, and we showed you this video many times, they had Simone Sanders, who used to be a high-level staffer in the White House working for Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris go on television. And when asked, how is the Democratic Party primary going to work? You have two candidates running against Joe Biden so far, RFK Jr. and Marianne Williamson, and she announced on behalf of the DNC that there would be no primaries, period. Now, when you have a sitting president who's a Democrat and he says he wants to run for re-election, that's the end of the story. She said the DNC will not allow any debates. It will not, in her words, quote, facilitate a primary.
I really think that the mealy-mouthed Democrats, as I like to call them, and some of my progressive friends who would like to live in a fantasy land, they need to come back to reality. Yeah. And the reality is this. The sitting president of the United States of America is a Democrat that would like to run for re-election, so much so that he has declared a re-election campaign. Right. In that case, the Democratic National Committee will not facilitate a primary process. There will be no debate stage for Bobby Kennedy, Marianne Williamson, or anyone else to stand on.
So we're going to have another Bobby Kennedy in an empty chair in the debate, right?
There will be no debate.
Yeah, no debate.
The Democratic National Committee administers the debates, and they're not going to set up a primary process for debates for someone to challenge the head of the Democratic Party.
Opposition, people like Marianne Williamson and Dean Phillips, who eventually joined, and then RFK left the Democratic Party and ran as an independent because there was no fair opportunity to run against Joe Biden. The DNC foreclosed any opportunity to choose any other candidate democratically. So that's been the very anti-democratic means by which the Democratic Party has chosen its nominee in the last three primary races. And then when they decided, after that debate, that they could no longer lie to the public and pretend that Joe Biden was cognitively capable, after spending months of accusing everybody who was raising questions or doubts about Biden's cognitive capability, accusing those of us who did that of spreading misinformation and fake news, of being far-right operatives. On a dime, they did a 180 and said, yes, not only is Joe Biden cognitively disabled, as we've been denying for months and years, in fact, he's so cognitively disabled that we want to force him from the race. And over the last month, Joe Biden has made abundantly clear over and over that not only did he have no intention of leaving the race, he was adamant about staying in. And yet a group of Democratic elites, massive Democratic funders, first threatened to cut off the funding for the Biden campaign and then in fact cut off that funding. Nancy Pelosi and Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer and Barack Obama, the leaders of the Democratic Party, first coordinated in secret and then out in the open to force Biden from the race with a series of daily, incessant leaks designed to force him out of that race. And finally, apparently, they drove Joe Biden out of the race. So essentially, Democratic elites pretended that Biden was selected as the nominee of their party democratically. And then once those elites wanted him out because they no longer believed he could beat Donald Trump after that debate, not only did they force him out of the race, but now they've chosen his replacement without any consultation on the part of the voters, which is Kamala Harris. One Democratic leader after the next, including now Nancy Pelosi and the Clintons, both Bill and Hillary Clinton, and major Democratic Party leaders, including now AOC, have all come out and endorsed Kamala Harris, making very clear it's a united Democratic Party front. They will not allow any alternatives to even be considered. So again, they chose the nominee, their fourth in 4 years, in a completely anti-democratic way. Not just not democratically, but in an aggressively anti-democratic way in back rooms, picked by operatives of the Democratic Party. At the same time, this very same party is insisting that the only way democracy can be saved, as though they're paragons of democratic values, is if you vote for them. Second point I think is really worth noting is the extremely strange manner in which Joe Biden pulled out of the race and then announced what is said to be his decision. Now, there are a lot of conspiracy theories circulating around, which I completely understand given how this was done. I'm not in any way on board with those. I don't think there's any evidence for them. But things like they kind of just took Joe Biden and forced his hand to sign, or that he didn't really decide this, or that even that he may be very physically ill or even dead. But I understand why conspiracies circulate. When you have no transparency and when events are deliberately left as extremely strange, people have so little faith and trust in media institutions and in institutions of authority generally that of course they're going to wonder if they're being lied to again, if they're being deceived again. One of the news stories that got so little attention because of Biden's decision was the fact that after Donald Trump was shot as part of an assassination attempt, there was a lot of stories saying, coming from the Trump campaign, that they had repeatedly asked for more and more security from Secret Service, and they were repeatedly denied. They were repeatedly denied the ability to have any Secret Service. And when that happened, the head of the Secret Service came out and denied it, as did other officials in Washington. They said, no, this is an absolute lie. This never happened. There was no request from the Trump campaign for any additional Secret Service. And then quietly, about 2 days ago, those same officials came out and said, actually, what we said was false. And they announced it on, I think, a Friday afternoon where no one pays attention. That's always the time to get bad news out. So they lie constantly. These institutions do. And so I understand why people rely on conspiracy theories to try and understand the world. But what happened here is bizarre. Joe Biden, the sitting president of the United States, who's supposedly still governing our country, still in charge of the nuclear codes, who the Democrats have been saying now is cognitively unfit to run for a second term, and yet apparently no one wants to force him out because they don't care if a person is cognitively unfit as long as he's carrying out or able to carry out in his name their desires and orders. If Joe Biden were 3 points in front of Donald Trump and likely to win, they would still be denying vehemently that there's anything wrong with Joe Biden. They would be attacking anyone who suggested that there was, as spreading fake news. They don't care they didn't care at all if Joe Biden had a second term being senile and with dementia. They only cared that they were concerned that he couldn't beat Trump. And so Joe Biden has been adamantly saying, as is the closest aides, no, it's a lie that he's going to drop out. They were leaking that he was likely to drop out. They were saying this is an absolute lie. Biden himself was saying, he even said in that interview with George Stephanopoulos, there's nobody who can force me out of this race other than the Lord Almighty. And already by then, it was clear that a lot of top Democrats wanted him out. He said, I don't care. I'm going to keep running. I'm the people's choice. And then out of nowhere, no one knew he was going to do this. No one was consulted. There was a letter in Joe Biden's name posted to his Twitter account where he just wrote a generic letter explaining that he had come to believe it was better for the country for him not to run. And then a tweet issued in Joe Biden's name, also in text form, saying that not only am I dropping out, but I'm endorsing Kamala Harris. Now, you would obviously expect a sitting president of the United States who makes that kind of decision, which is very rarely made, to go on television and explain it, or at least simultaneously announce a time that night when they're going to go on television and explain their decision to the country, given they're still the sitting president. That's what Lyndon Baines Johnson did in 1968 when he was expected to run for re-election he realized that he couldn't because the anti-war sentiment in his own party against the Vietnam War and therefore against him was so high that there was almost a certainty that he couldn't get the nomination. It was very likely to be a grueling battle. And of course, he went on. He didn't just issue a statement in his name. He went on to television and gave an address from the Oval Office, which is indicative of the significance of this sort of event. Joe Biden has not done that. There was a statement issued on Twitter in Biden's name, and then Biden disappeared. He hasn't been seen in public since then, let alone explained his decision in his own words. And yes, it's true that Biden has COVID, and that's why he's in Delaware self-isolating, but his doctors over the last couple of days had told us that he was improving significantly. But the bigger point is, if Joe Biden is too sick to get in front of a camera and explain his decision, then he's too sick to have made that decision. Or put another way, if Joe Biden is mentally and physically healthy enough to make a decision of that magnitude, for him to be involved and conscious and to have thought through the implications and made a decision of that magnitude, then he's physically and mentally well enough to go in front of a camera and explain why. Now, again, I don't believe, and I'm not saying that Biden's in some basement somewhere tied up or that he's dead. I'm just saying that we are owed an explanation about why Biden made this decision after swearing repeatedly that he wouldn't. There's some accounts in the press from anonymous aides about why he made the decision, but absolutely nothing from Joe Biden himself. And of course, that's going to create a climate every day that goes by of increasing strangeness and doubts and uncertainty about what happened. It feeds this narrative that something very undemocratic took place. And although Biden said in his letter, I'm going to explain it to you in a few days, you can't do that. You can't be the president, make a decision of this significance, and then disappear from public entirely. Maybe he's angry about what he was forced to do. Maybe he's embarrassed. But he's still the president of the United States with all that power in his hands, and it's incredibly disturbing that we haven't heard from him. And every day that goes by, it's going to be even more so. Now, I just wanted to talk briefly about Kamala Harris, who's almost certainly going to be the nominee in place of Joe Biden for president. And the reason I say that is because Democrats follow their leaders. Every sector of the Democratic Party, the centrist and conservative part of the Democratic Party, the liberals, and the left. Every faction is united always. They're always following in the footsteps of their leader. They're always doing what they're told. And so when Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama or the Clintons, Hakeem Jeffries comes out and say, we endorse Kamala Harris, when AOC does that, when Elizabeth Warren does that, there's no doubt they're going to do what they're told and endorse Kamala Harris. And I think one of the things that's so bizarre about that is that Kamala Harris' path to the White House was done without really any votes at all. She was fairly elected from a blue state to become Attorney General, then to the Senate. And she tried to be the president in 2020. She had everything in her favor. Huge amounts of money from California, incredibly favorable media coverage as the first black woman who might be president. The media loved Kamala Harris, and yet the voters hated her. She could barely get up to 2% in the polls. She had one good debate that Democrats thought she had when she basically implied Joe Biden was a segregationist and a racist who worked with Strom Thurmond to keep her out of integrated schools and other girls like her. But after that, Tulsi Gabbard destroyed her by pointing out she was a prosecutor who sent huge numbers of overwhelmingly black men to prison for low-level nonviolent drug crimes and worked hard to keep them there. And just in general, she was a mess, and she pulled out of that race, never getting really more than 2% of the vote after that first debate. No black support, no support from really anyone, and was forced to drop out. She was then chosen by Joe Biden after he announced he would only choose a black woman as his vice president. There were 2 or 3 he could choose from. He picked her. And now, again, nobody voted for her to be the Democratic nominee. It was like a throwback to the 1950s and 60s when they used to choose the nominee in a back room. She was chosen by Nancy Pelosi and the Clintons and Obama and Chuck Schumer and Democratic billionaires. And the reason she had to drop out of the race is because she was a terrible politician. Nobody liked her. Nobody was energized by her. And I think the most incredible thing to watch is all of these self-identified leftists who are loyal to the Democratic Party who have spent 10 months screaming that the Israeli war in Gaza is a, quote, genocide, and that the Biden administration is complicit in it, responsible for it. They've been arming it. They've been funding it. And now when Joe Biden leaves the race, there's all these kind of people heaping praise on him. Oh, he's a great patriot who sacrificed for the good of the country. Great, decent man, as we've gone over before. But also, Kamala Harris was every bit as much on board with all of that. There was never a moment where Kamala Harris indicated the slightest ideological, political difference with not only Joe Biden, but the Democratic establishment itself. Never once. In fact, one of her first acts in the Senate when she was elected in 2016 was to introduce a resolution condemning the Obama administration's decision to abstain from a UN vote that allowed the UN to rule that Israel's occupation was illegal. Ordinarily, the U.S. vetoes it. Obama didn't veto it. He abstained, and there was a Senate resolution to condemn Barack Obama from being insufficiently pro-Israel, and Kamala Harris was one of the main co-sponsors. She's spoken at AIPAC. She has, if anything, been even more of a pro-establishment candidate than Joe Biden. And the one thing I will say that I think might be a difference between the two of them, and it could be minor, but it could be significant, but it's certainly not in her favor, is that at least Joe Biden, after spending 52 years in Washington, 40 years as a senator from Delaware trying to become president, 8 years as vice president to Barack Obama, and now 4 years as a president, built up enough self-belief, I guess you could say. He's constantly talking about how there's nobody in the world who understands foreign policy better than he does. He has a self-belief that allows him on occasion to buck what he's told to do by the establishment, even though he never really does it for the good. But at least in theory and like comportment, he's willing to do that. Even the media, because he just believes in himself so much. Kamala Harris is a novice. She knows nothing except how to be a lawyer. She knows nothing about foreign affairs or economic policy. She's a completely empty vessel, a complete craven opportunist who does and says whatever she needs to advance her career. She owes everything to the Democratic establishment. That's who let her win in California. That is who, after the debacle of her campaign, led to her being chosen as vice president. And now it's the Democratic establishment, nobody else, who plotted to force Joe Biden out of the race and put Kamala in that space. And put Kamala in that space. And as a result, she's going to be more malleable than almost anyone to establishment interest in Washington, to the Democratic Party elite, to the deep state, to the U.S. security state. She has no confidence, rightly so, to understand any of those issues and to reject what she's being told to do. And I'm watching all these self-identified soft leftists who are loyal to the Democratic Party twisting themselves into deceitful contortions to pretend that she's somehow better than Joe Biden or different than him ideologically. She's a complete craven tool of the establishment. They're going to use the identity politics angle to make her seem like she's something new and refreshing. That's what identity politics is for, to take establishment figures like Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama and just say, look, they're a little different on the surface, but they're there to carry out status quo policies and make them seem new and different. Nobody bought that when Kamala Harris tried it in 2020 because she looks like the deputy general counsel for Exxon who just got out of a board meeting. And she's tried to adapt herself to speaking differently. I just don't think it's genuine, but I'm not a political pundit. All I'm saying is what I understand is the substance of policy, and the idea that she's somehow going to be this new progressive figure or anti-establishment figure or better than or different than Joe Biden is a complete self-delusion. We need to see Joe Biden and explain in his own words why he chose to drop out of the race after swearing over and over that he wouldn't, why he chose to endorse Kamala Harris, why he thinks she's the best person for the job. we need to appreciate how anti-democratic the Democratic Party has been in all of its conduct internally in choosing their nominee since 2016 at least. And you're going to see a propaganda campaign on behalf of Kamala Harris to turn her into something that she isn't and has never been, the likes of which you haven't seen before. Already today they leaked people close to Kamala Harris, and the media went and not only mindlessly wrote it down, but got swooning and giggly about it, that she called various Democratic allies today while wearing a Howard University sweatshirt and sweatpants. That's just the start of what they're going to try and turn her into. Because remember how desperate they are to ensure Donald Trump doesn't win. The media, they invented all kinds of scandal, the Russiagate hoax, all sorts of other things. The Hunter Biden reporting being Russian disinformation. They tried to impeach Trump and then put him in prison just to add to the anti-democratic bona fides of the Democratic Party and their establishment media allies. And so engaging in pure hagiography and propaganda on behalf of Kamala Harris is something you don't have to have any doubt they're about to engage in the most embarrassingly extreme, worshipful, and deceitful way. So those are a few of my thoughts. I'm sure I'm going to have some others, which I might wait until I get back in order to share further. But like I said, if something really significant happens, I will weigh in again.
Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.